Title of the topic this morning is What You See is What You Get. And I'm hoping that by the end of our time this morning together, you might see that in just a little different light than perhaps you have in the past. I know that whenever I hear that, what you see is what you get. In other words, here I am, you got to take me just as I am, right? That's just how and that's pretty well what that means to all of us, I think. But I'm going to just throw a little bit of a different spin on that this morning if I could. In Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11 to 13, we read this. For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call on me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you, and ye shall seek me and find me, when you shall search for me with all your heart. So from that scripture, I want to just focus on that last phrase, with all your heart. Now this here is not talking about a formula that works the same for everyone. Some things work the same. The law of gravity works the same no matter who you are, or where you are, or what you are. The law of gravity is the law of gravity. But when he says this, he says with all your heart, not my heart. In other words, he wants you to seek the Lord with where you're coming from, not from where I'm coming from, with your heart, with your perspective on things, not with mine. You see, it's a very personal proposition. It presents a different challenge to each one of us. So he says, you shall seek me and you shall find me when you shall search for me with all your heart. In other words, just doing what everybody else is doing is not going to really cut it for me. Just following the flow is really not going to get it for me, because my heart is different than yours. And of course we all realize here that he's not talking about our physical hearts. He's talking about something that's more spiritual, more personal, our personality, our character, our depth, the real us. We see things and we do things according to our own hearts and our own perceptions. So when I say what you see is what you get, I'm going to put this slant on it right here. You see, we all start from the same place in that respect, that we must see things from our own perspective. So what's in our hearts determines really what we see. I remember when I went to Bible school years, it's a long time ago now, it was in my 20s, and met some really great people there. And I remember there was this one gentleman there, and he kind of stood out from everybody else. He'd been a semi-professional athlete before he came to Bible school, so he was a physical specimen. And does anybody here remember Jack Nicklaus, the Golden Bear? He had a golden head of hair, it was really nice, and he was athletic, and he had a sports car, and he had a real nice girlfriend, and he was very socially secure and confident. And I thought, that guy's full of himself. And I kind of saw him that way, and every time I saw him, it's like, oh yeah, I don't like him. And that really, after a while, we were in Bible school, and here I am thinking that way, right, about somebody. So I remember one night we were doing something together, and I was really convicted about the way that I perceived that person. And I told him, I said, I need to ask you for forgiveness. He said, well, what for? And I told him that. And as a result of saying that, we got to know each other, and we became good friends. And even all these years later, I've been to his home and he's been to mine, and every now and then I'll get a phone call out of the blue, or if I'm up in Ontario, in London, I'll give him a call and we'll go for lunch together, even after all these years. But you see, I saw him from my perspective. I wasn't athletic. I wasn't socially secure and confident. I didn't have a car. I didn't have all these things, right? So I saw him from my lack, and a little bit of me was really a little bit jealous of it. So what I saw was what I got. I saw him the wrong way, and that's what I got. But once I got to know him, I had a completely different experience. that make sense? Because of the way I saw it. You see, our hearts can deceive us because we see everything through the lens of our own experience. Now, Paul put it this way. He said, "For now we see through a glass dimly, but then face to face." Now we don't see things clearly. See, our prior experiences, the prior path that we took plays a major role in the way a person interprets everything that's around us. For example, if I was to walk up to somebody, or somebody was walk up to you and they just went like this, maybe if when you were young you were bullied and you were kicked around, you would probably go like this, right? Certainly if I hung around Mike when he was younger, that would go like this. But for other people, if I was to walk up to you and go like this, you'd go, "Yeah, high five," bang. Because you played on the sports team and that was the way you celebrated. It was the exact same move, but interpreted in a completely different way. You see that? See, our hearts determine the way we see things. Whatever path you took to get to this place this morning has a huge impact on how you perceive things, what you see, and how you experience God. So here's a key point. As long as you are looking through the lens of your own experience, you cannot see God for who He really is. Because you see, Jeremiah says, "The heart is deceitful above all things, and beyond cure, who can understand it?" The heart is deceitful. My heart will deceive me. My heart will cause me to see things in a different way than what they really are. I certainly did that with the gentleman that I referred to who became a friend over the years. My heart was deceitful because I was looking at that person through the lens of my own experience. And as long as we're looking through the lens of our own experience, we're not going to see things as they really are. Two people can look at the same thing and see two completely different things. One person sees an opportunity and the other person sees a problem. One person sees something that's warm and inviting, another person sees something completely different. Somebody could come to this place, and if they're not, they could come and sit at the back and leave and walk out and say, "The place isn't very friendly at all." But that's the way they're used to seeing things. That's the way they tend to look at the world. They came with that attitude that, maybe they had a bad experience in church when they were younger, and they tend to carry that with them. Paul put it this way in Ephesians chapter 4. He says, "But ye have not so learned Christ, if so be that ye have heard him, and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off, concerning the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that ye put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness." What Paul is saying there, it says you have to stop seeing things based on the old man, based on who you were, based on the life experience that you've had up to this point. You have to stop seeing life through that filter. In photography, if you want to completely change how a scene looks in the picture, you use something called a filter. And it completely changes the perspective, the picture that you get put depending on the filter. It's the exact same image. It's the exact same landscape. It's the same camera. It's the same everything, but you put a different filter on it and you get a completely different perspective from that picture. It's the same in our lives. Paul says you've got to stop looking at things through the filter of the old man. You've got to stop looking at things through the filter of what's happened to you in the past. That's why it's so important when he says, "I have taken as far as the east is from the west, I have removed your transgressions from you." How many times have you talked to somebody and they see everything in life through the failures of their past and they can never get beyond it? You ever met somebody like that? And you might say, well, no, God has forgiven you. They've not forgiven themselves. They're still looking at things through the filter of the old man. They're still looking at things from the filter of what they've done, of where they've come from, of the experiences that they've had. They're seeing it through that filter, and it simply distorts everything. They don't see situations as they really are, because the heart is deceitful above all else. And they don't even understand that that's happening. They'll look at something, and for them, that's their truth. And you can't convince them that it isn't. And so what they see around them is what they get. It's the world that they live in. Along these lines, Paul tells us, I have been crucified with Christ. And it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Paul says, I do not look at this life. I do not look at my service to God from the filter of who I was. That person is dead. He's crucified with Christ. And I'm now looking at life. I'm looking at what I have in front of me. I'm looking at the opportunities that I have through the filter of Christ. Not my own filter. I mean, if Paul was to look at things through his filter, he would have a completely different cut on things. I mean, he was highly educated. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was educated probably, he could go Sunday after Sunday to synagogue after synagogue and be the most educated person in the room. And so Paul could take the attitude, well, what new can you teach me? Right? How far would he have got? Would we still be reading the epistles of Paul today? Would we be reading them? Would we be reading them at all if that was his attitude? I don't think so. He could have taken it through the filter of action and work. I mean, Paul was a doer. He was always on the go. He was a person with goals and plans, and he was driven. He could have come to his service to God and said, well, I can do this on my own. But no, we understand that it's not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. He could have been the person that said, you know what, I can do this. We don't really need to worry about all this. We can get it done on our own. I would dare say that if he had taken that attitude, that his life's work would not have lasted. Paul could have also looked at things through the filter of his past life with regards to the connections of the people that he had. If there was an important person to know in the community where he was going, Paul would know that person. Because like politics is, you know, if you want to meet the highest person in the province, you'd go talk to the premier or whatever of the province. Well, back in those days, it was the Jewish faith, and you were the synagogue. The rabbi would have been the most powerful person, right? Paul knew all of them. He could have relied on his connections. I doubt if he would have had the influence upon the world that he did had he done that. No, Paul said, I'm dead. I'm crucified with Christ. All of that I counted as dung, he said, didn't he? He looked at things through the filter of Christ. We see actually the same observation from King David. In Proverbs 37-10, he says, 2 things have I required of thee. Deny me them not before I die. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me, and here's the key of what he's saying, lest I be full and deny thee, and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal, and take the name of the Lord my God in vain. So even David tells us that how I look at things is really going to affect how I perceive things. My background. For David, King David, riches for King David might be a whole lot different than riches for us. I don't know, he's a king, right? He starts off by getting pretty well everything he wants, but he's saying, I can't rely on that, or else I'm going to lose my faith in God. But he also has a threshold down below that. If he goes below it, he said, Lord, these things affect me. So he says, Lord, keep me on the path that allows me to see you for who you are. Keep me on the path that allows me to see things as they really are. Not putting my hope in horses. Not putting my hope in chariots. Not putting my hope in riches. Help me to see things, Lord, as they really are. He prays, Lord, remove far from me vanity and lies. We can read that as one of two ways. He could be saying, I don't want to be vain, or I don't want to be a liar. Or he could say, he's saying, I don't want to be influenced by vanity, and I don't want to be influenced by lies. Father, I don't want to be influenced because the heart is deceitful above all else. I might not see things the way they really are. Father, help me to see things as you see them. David says how he sees God is very important. He said, if I rely on riches, I'm not going to see my God in the same way. If I rely on my experience in life, how well I'm doing, I'm not going to see God in the same way. You see, we're no different. The path that got us here, the path that brought you here this morning, influences your perception of what you see here and what you experience here. If you're just going by your own self, your own perceptions, your own experiences, they will influence. You could be in the exact same situation as somebody else and you walk out and you have a completely different experience because of what you brought to the table. The same for your relationships. Somebody, there's all kinds of people in good relationships that believe those relationships are going to end up broken. Because that's the way they see things. That's the way they've seen it in their home. That's the way they've seen it in their past. There are people that have jobs today that believe their job is a dead-end street because they've not experienced getting a promotion. They've not experienced having fulfillment at work. And they believe that a job is just like that. That's all it is. There are people that are sitting with us here this morning you could very well be looking at the future of your life and think there's not much hope out there because of the experience that you've had in the past. And for each one of us, a key is to not look at things through the lens of our own experience, but to look at things through the lens of Christ, of the hope that He gives us. Paul says, I die daily. Obviously, he's not talking about a physical death. He's not talking about a physical death. No, he says, I have to die. Who I am, my experiences, what I was, I have to crucify that flesh daily. And it's only in doing that that I can see things as Christ sees them. Jesus himself said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. I mean, do you really think that Jesus is telling you not to eat a chocolate bar there? Do you really think that? Do you really think he's telling you not to put on warm socks? No. He's saying, don't look at things through your own eyes, through your own experience. Deny yourself. That person has hurt you. You want to hurt them back. What you want to do. Deny yourself. The job is getting tough. You want to quit. It's what you want to do because that's what you're used to doing. Deny yourself. He's saying don't look at things through your own prism. Take up your cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. Do everything according to the way you really want to deep down because of your experience, you're going to lose your life. You're going to lose the potential of the life that God has for you. Because there is a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Whosoever loses his life for my sake, the same will save it. I want to suggest to you that to deny ourselves, to deny myself, means to live each day, not as my experience tells me to live, but to live as Christ would live. To react not to my feelings, but to react as Christ would react. Now that's easier said than done, I know. I want to talk about that for a little bit too. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21 to 24, we read this. For to this you were called, because Christ has suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his footsteps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. All right, here's the example that we're supposed to follow. When they heaped abuse on him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats, but instructed himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on a tree, so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. That's the example. Not to see things and to react to things according to... Isn't it the hardest thing for you to say to your spouse, look, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Right? How about even to your boss when you make a mistake? Isn't that the hardest thing? Don't you want to justify? Yeah, but... It's just hard to say, you know what, I messed up. You know what? I'm sorry. That's not the flesh, is it though? No. You're the one. It was you, not me. Well, Paul said, Jesus said, if you want to serve God, you got to crucify the old man. You got to let that go if you really, really want to see God in your life. So how are we supposed to follow in his footsteps? How do we see his example and learn from it? I mean, it's not like we're like the disciples walking on the road to Emmaus, and there he is, although they didn't know it was him, but there he was. He sat down and made fire for them. It's not like we're the disciples, and he says, come on in, I've made supper for you. We don't see him physically. How can we get our example from Christ? Back to our original text. You shall seek me, and you shall find me when you seek me with all your heart. Now, that phrase, all your heart, put your heart into it. If you usually think about that in the context of maybe working or maybe sports, in other words, give it more effort. But that phrase, all your heart, I don't believe it's talking about effort. Because all of our hard works, they're just like filthy rags. See, we can't work or earn our way into it. It's not works lest any man should boast. I think all your heart speaks to the level of sincerity. That's why Jesus said, you see this widow woman here that put one mite in? She put more in than all the rest of them. Because it was the sincerity of her heart. That's why when Jesus was walking through the throng, he was being thronged, he was being mobbed by people, he said, who touched me? Because there was somebody there that touched him, and they had the sincerest heart in the whole crowd. He says, if you search for me with all your heart, in other words, you're searching for me with sincerity. Because God, he looks on the heart. Paul instructs, the goal of this command is love, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Jesus teaches, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. You want to see God? Don't look for him through the filter of your own life. You want to see God? Look to Him, look for Him through the filter that He has given us. And that filter is there. And then we're going to talk about that in just a second. John, 1 John 3:1 says, "Dear friends, now we are the children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears," and here's a key phrase, "we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is." Now, some things you can say, well, this is what I believe, and there's no way we can prove it. But let me tell you something I believe, and I can't really prove it. I don't believe that when you die, it's like you win the lottery, and all of a sudden you wake up and you're Christ-like. And you get to heaven, and you've got the white robe, and you've got your wings, and you've got your halo, and you've got your harp, and you're like 100%. I don't believe that's the time to think that I'm going to become more like Jesus. I think the time to become more like Him is now. Yes. Is now. You see, He says here, notice that phrase, notice what it says. It says, "We shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is." Remember that guy in college I told you about? Right? After I start seeing him differently, I start to really get to know him. And I start to really like him. And I start to look to him as a friend. But it wasn't until I saw him for who he was. He wasn't arrogant, he was just confident. He didn't think he was better looking than all the rest of the guys. We just thought he was. You see, that was all on me. It was all on us, not on him. When I saw him differently, my relationship with him changed. Get this. That effect is infinitely more powerful with Christ. The more you get to know Christ, the more you will become like him. How do we get to know Christ? In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. You see, that's what he means when he says, if you seek for me with all your heart. On the one hand, there's a person standing saying, Lord, I thank you that I am not as this poor person here. I obey all the laws. Yeah, he obeyed all the laws, but he obeyed them all on the outside. He was like a washed sepulcher, white on the outside and full of dead men's bones on the inside, because he served God on the outside, but his heart was far from God. Compare that with a person that meditates upon the Word and puts it deep in their heart, and that Word, what they've planted in their heart, affects how they live, affects how they look at the world around them, affects how they speak to people around them, affects how they treat people around them. It's in their heart. They're not just obeying it on the outside. That's what he means, I believe, when he says, if you seek me with all of your heart. Do you want your Christian walk to be fruitful? Psalm we read, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or set foot in the path of sinners, or sits in the seat of the mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. All your heart. You meditate upon that word. It changes who you are. You begin to see Christ through that word, and it automatically makes you more like him. It's just automatic. The more you know Christ, the more you'll be like him, because the more you'll want to be like him. The more his word will affect you and guide you and strengthen you. John 12, the same came therefore to Philip, which was of Bethsaida of Galilee, and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. What you see is what you get. If you look at this world and you look at everything that's around you, that's all you'll have. But if you look unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of your faith, you will get more of him. And also, what you see is what you get. If I look unto Jesus, and if I seek him through his word with a pure heart, what people see when they see me, what they'll get is a little bit of Jesus. It's the only way. It's the only way. They'll see it through me. They'll see it through you. David understood the path to God. He did. He said, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Your path has brought you here. But his path will bring you home. Psalm 119 and 105 in closing. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. You light your path with his word, and what you see is what you'll get.